Today, the digital giants stir. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and problem news with a distinctively Australian flavour. We got a glimpse today of the power held by the big digital players as Facebook announced significant changes to sharing and viewing news on the platform in Australia in reaction to the government's initiative to make them pay for content. The policy changes came as the federal government's proposed media bargain code passed the House on Wednesday night. It will now go to the Senate. The law will make Facebook, as well as Google, pay for news content on their platforms. Now, the advertising landscape has changed beyond recognition over the past 3 decades, with digital channels now accounting for more than half of total ad spend, and strong growth in social media, video e-commerce, and search over the past 10 years has come at the expense of the more traditional channels such as TV and print. The sharp decline in TV ad spend over recent years has coincided with inevitable increases in social media and online video ads. Experts predict TV consumption will continue to fall over the coming years. And newspapers and magazine ad spend both peaked before the financial crisis and have now plummeted to levels not seen since the mid-1980s. Despite a predicted slight plateau in growth in 2020, the rise in search ad spend over recent years has been meteoric, with data showing online content consumption having doubled since the start of the pandemic. Search's growth is likely to continue in the coming years. Now, on April the 20th, 2020, the Australian government asked the ACCC to develop a mandatory code of conduct to address bargaining power imbalances between Australian news media businesses and digital platforms, specifically Google and Facebook. And the ACCC released a draft code for public consultation on the 31st of July 2020. That draft code would allow news media businesses to bargain individually or collectively with Google and Facebook over payment for the inclusion of news on their services. And the code also included a set of minimum standards for providing advance notice of changes to algorithmic ranking and the presentation of news, appropriately recognising original news content, and providing information about how and when Google and Facebook make available user data collected through user interactions with news content. And in December, Josh Frydenberg spoke with the Australian head of Google and Facebook before announcing the proposed laws. Frydenberg said he hoped it would put digital platforms, which are backed by huge digital advertising dollars, on a more even kilter with traditional news outlets. And Frydenberg revealed that he'd spoke with Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg last Sunday. In fact, on Monday he said, "I spoke to him just yesterday, and I have been speaking as recently as this morning, as well as over the weekend, with Sundar, the head of Google," he told the ABC's AM program. "They are very focused on what's happening here in Australia, but I sense that they're also trying to reach deals, and that is welcome." But now the Communications Minister Paul Fletcher said that the Facebook news ban raised serious questions. It certainly raises issues about the credibility of information on the platform, he said, and that the federal government would push ahead with its proposed laws. "We want Google and Facebook to stay in Australia, but we've been very clear that if you do business in Australia, you need to comply with the laws passed by the elected parliament of this nation," he told the ABC. Frydenberg has again spoken to Facebook's CEO And he sounded pretty positive. The government said it was continuing to talk with Facebook. And in fact, they spoke this morning. Frydenberg described this 30-minute conversation as very cordial and very constructive. We want them to remain in Australia, but we also want them to pay for original content, he said. Yes, there are some differences, but let's see if we can work them through. Now, William Easton, the managing director of Facebook Australia and New Zealand, wrote that in response to Australia's proposed new media bargaining law, Facebook will restrict publishers and people in Australia from sharing or viewing Australian and international news content. The proposed law fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between our platform and publishers, he said, who use it to share news content. It has left us facing a stark choice: attempt to comply with a law that ignores the realities of this relationship, or stop allowing news content on our services in Australia. With a heavy heart, we are choosing the latter, he said. This discussion has focused on US technology companies and how they benefit from news content on their services. We understand many will ask why the platforms may respond differently. The answer is because our platforms have fundamentally different relationships with news. Google search is inextricably intertwined with news, and publishers do not voluntarily provide their content. On the other hand, publishers willingly choose to post news on Facebook, as it allows them to sell more subscriptions, grow their audiences, and increase advertising revenue. In fact, he said, and as we've made clear to the Australian government for many months, the value exchange between Facebook and publishers runs in favour of the publishers, which is the reverse of what the legislation would require the arbiter to assume. Last year, Facebook granted approximately 5.1 billion free referrals to Australian publishers, worth an estimated $407 million. For Facebook, the business gain from news is minimal. News makes up less than 4% of the content people see in their news feeds, and journalism is important to a democratic society, which is why we build dedicated free tools to support news organisations around the world in innovating their content for online audiences. For the last 3 years, he said, we've worked with the Australian government to find a solution that recognises the realities of how our services work. We've long worked towards rules that would encourage innovation and collaboration between digital platforms and news organisations. Unfortunately, this legislation does not do that. Instead, it seeks to penalise Facebook for content it didn't take or ask for. We were prepared, he said, to launch Facebook News in Australia and significantly increase our investments with local publishers. However, we were only prepared to do this with the right rules in place. This legislation sets a precedent where the government decides who enters into these news content agreements, and ultimately how much the party that already receives value from the free service gets paid. We will now prioritise investments to other countries as part of our plans to invest in new licensing news programs and experiences. Others also raise concerns. Independent experts and analysts around the world have consistently outlined problems with the proposed legislation. While the government has made some changes, the proposed law fundamentally fails to understand how our services work, he said. Unfortunately, this means people and news organisations in Australia are now restricted from posting news links and sharing or viewing Australian and international news content on Facebook. Globally, posting and sharing news links from Australian publishers is also restricted. To do this, we are using a combination of technologies to restrict news content, and we will have processes to review any content that was inadvertently removed. So for Australian publishers, this means that they are restricted from sharing or posting any content on Facebook pages. Administrators will still be able to access other features from their Facebook page, including Page Insights and Creator Studio, and will continue to provide access to all other standard Facebook services, including data tools and CrowdTangle, he said. For international publishers, this means they can continue to publish news content on Facebook, but links and posts cannot be viewed or shared by Australian audiences. And for our Australian community, this means they cannot view or share Australian or international news content on Facebook or content from Australian and international news pages. And for international community, this means they cannot view or share Australian news content on Facebook or content from Australian news pages. The changes affecting news content will not otherwise change Facebook's products and services in Australia, and we want to ensure the millions of Australians using Facebook to connect with friends and family, grow their businesses and join groups to help support their local communities, that these services will not change. And he went on to say, we recognise it's important to connect people to authoritative information, and we will continue to promote dedicated information hubs like the COVID-19 Information Centre that connects Australians with relevant health information. Our commitment to remove harmful misinformation and provide access to credible and timely information will not change. We remain committed to our third-party fact-checking programme with Agence France Presse and Australian Associated Press, and will continue to invest to support their important work. Our global commitment to invest in quality news also has not changed. We recognise that news provides a vitally important role in society and democracy, which is why we recently expanded Facebook News to hundreds of publications in the UK. We hope that in the future the Australian Government will recognise the value we provide already and work with us to strengthen rather than limit our partnerships with publishers. Now, the impacts were immediate, with major news sites on Facebook going dark. This includes both Australian and international news pages. And it was pretty widespread, with sites like the Bureau of Meteorology caught, as well as emergency information sites like bushfires, and they even included satirical sites such as the Betur Advocate. Now, there are 2 points here. First, this shows the power of the large digital giants. They can turn off access on a whim. Australia's small population means we are relatively irrelevant to their global businesses. So the question is, do they really care? On the other hand, it seems to me that the government has been heavy-handed here, and it's tilted towards the local media barons despite the fallout. It is absolutely true that traditional media funding from advertising is being drained away by the new digital players. Digital advertising expected to be more than $520 billion by 2024, and it's estimated that advertising spending worldwide was $517 billion US in 2020, which actually represented a decline of about 11.8% compared with the previous year. But from 2018 to 2023, the internet advertising industry growth is projected to average 13% per year. And Google has around 30% and Facebook 20% of the online market. And internet advertising is currently the largest segment of total ad spending, and growth is driven by more people spending more time online, the expansion of e-commerce, a steady increase in the consumer base, and multiple benefits compared to traditional advertising. Businesses and advertising agencies can clearly track advertising statistics, such as engagement and ROI from their marketing campaigns, which leads to greater flexibility and control over marketing budgets. Internet advertising enables easy advertising scalability, A and B testing, and targeting, especially with user tracking tools such as cookies and geolocation. The majority of internet users regularly visit a handful of websites such as Google and Facebook, making them ideal platforms for displaying ads to an extremely wide audience. And Google, Facebook and Amazon were the biggest winners as reflected in the successful Q3 earnings reports. Google's worldwide ad revenues were up 6.5% year over year for search, 8.9% for network members, and a massive 32.4% for YouTube. Facebook's ad revenues were up more than 20%, and Amazon's ad revenues increased 51%. And we estimate that the duopoly will account for nearly 2/3 of total US digital ad spending this year. So this is a game of chicken. And in fact, we are seeing the real unequal power of the big digital players compared not just with traditional media, but also with the government here. And of course, we are caught in the crossfire because now content that was available to us is no longer available to us. And that is a big deal. And I think it shows the inequality here in terms of the power plays. And I say again, it seems to me that the government is more aligned with our local media barons than perhaps taking a more strategic view of the evolution of the digital marketplaces, digital channels, and the digital players. It's no time to try to put the clock back. We should rather be laying a different path to a different future. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.